All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Orange Wheel podcast, the podcast where we support business leaders in understanding the monetary transition. I'm really excited for today's interview. I'm joined here by a well-known figure in the Bitcoin community, Jordan Walker. He's made it his mission to cut through the noise and make Bitcoin accessible to everyone, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and individuals alike. Jordan's the founder and CEO of the Bitcoin Collective, a UK-based organization dedicated to education and community building around Bitcoin. He's the host of the Bitcoin Collective podcast, and is the driving force behind one of the UK's first Bitcoin-only conferences, and the creator of educational resources designed to demystify what is often seen as a complex and intimidating topic. So welcome to the show, Jordan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So it's a very nice intro. Not everyone does that.
Yeah, I figured there. I mean, I'm testing different intro styles, so hopefully nothing I said there was incorrect.
No.
It was all accurate.
Yeah.
Great. So Jordan, I mean, I guess many people will be aware of kind of who you are and the Bitcoin Collective podcast, but maybe and we'll dive deeper into kind of the work you have ongoing. But maybe to introduce the conversation here, be curious to kind of hear what was it in your Bitcoin journey that convinced you to dedicate your time and energy in the area of education. What was it that kind of drove you in that direction?
I would say curiosity, really. So the way that Bitcoin Collective was formed was through the podcast initially. It was me and my co-host at the time, Jim. And yes, we were at the beginning, we were into cryptocurrency because we didn't really understand the difference. So going back quite a lot of years now. And it was all about asking why and questioning stuff. But the important thing was getting guests on to actually help us as well and like educate us as we went through our journey essentially. So we had the likes of Jeff Booth, Larry Lepard, Nat Brumell, like a host of amazing guests. And that then shaped our understanding and made us obviously go full Bitcoin only because you can't really have a conversation with them without being like, oh, why am I talking about cryptocurrency? And why not just Bitcoin? So that really shaped like the podcast, and then moving on to that, we've built a company out at the back of that. And yeah, I just wanted to speak to people that were further ahead than me on this journey, and learn from people that are further ahead, because I mean, I still do that. That's what everyone kind of does, because nobody really knows nobody knows the future. But Bitcoin is such a deep rabbit hole as well, and there are people that are further down the rabbit hole than others. So it's about like identifying where you are in that rabbit hole, if you're just at the entrance of it, or if you're deep down it. And the rabbit hole never ends. That's the thing that I really like. So yeah, that's where we started. I can't even remember the original question now.
Yeah, no. The question was like kind of taking the direction, the focusing your time and energy mainly on the education element of it. But I think that you answered the question quite well, in the sense that it was kind of, if I play back what I heard, it's about your own intellectual curiosity about, I guess, initially cryptocurrency, but over time, specifically Bitcoin, and then being able to, I guess, both learn from others and then also convey that learning on to more people, right? To kind of take that message outward.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing there is, I see myself as placing myself as like a bridge in between the traditional world, let's say, the traditional system, traditional finance, and the Bitcoin world. And I'm able to, a lot of people in Bitcoin will figure out Bitcoin, and then their communication with that old fiat world is very assertive, and it puts people on the defensive if they're hearing that some of these things that we think and we believe. So what I aim to do is just make it as relatable as possible to people, because we've all been on that journey, and it's just remembering where you were in that rabbit hole and what you were like, what the communication style you prefer was. So with the Bitcoin Collective, we were very like open, relatable, try and make as much relatable content as possible, and bridge that gap between the two systems. Because I kind of look at it as like you've got the fiat system and you've got the Bitcoin system.
Yeah, certainly. And I think I think communication, just from my own personal perspective, it can certainly be a challenge, because I guess as much as, we kind of describe it as kind of one, Bitcoiners as one monolith, I guess there is quite a few sects or, and certainly styles, I suppose, within that. And I think that's what makes it, I guess, quite interesting in the sense that the rabbit hole never ends, but also there's areas where there's kind of like agreement, and also areas of, let's say, disagreement in terms of what, and there's, in my personal opinion, there's not like one true way to be a Bitcoiner. There's so many different styles and pathways. But coming back to what you said, I think there certainly is a fairly vocal contingent within the Bitcoin community that can be quite, use the word assertive, I guess. Some people might use the word toxic, that can certainly not necessarily be very, as you said, relatable for the average person who's maybe getting their first exposure to this world, and certainly can turn many people off. So, I for one definitely appreciate people who come with a more I'm not sure what the right word would be, but let's say calm and like balanced approach to education and communication about the topic.
Yeah, and like what people have to realize as well, a lot of society isn't financially literate in the current system that we live in. So I always say that if you're going to someone and saying there's 21 million Bitcoin and it's scarce and that's really important, and like you're hammering that message, a lot of people don't even realize that the current system, the fiat, is infinite and you can print as much as possible. So they don't see a problem there. And like that's what you kind of need to focus on, is the problem rather than Bitcoin at that point. If you're speaking to someone that's not into Bitcoin, Bitcoin's irrelevant. You just need to be making them aware of what the problem is, and then just helping them along on that journey. Because then, as we know, once you've identified the problem, you want to look for a solution. And lots of people, lots of guests that have been on my show as well, is like, I looked at gold, I looked at property, and I investigated them, and they weren't as good as Bitcoin. And I still can't find anything that's as good as Bitcoin as a store of value anyway. So identifying and focusing on the problem is, that's the big thing that we do anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. And sort of, I'm just going to close this door now because it's
No worries.
Yeah, and on the financial literacy side, I think there are layers to it. I think almost before you can even get to Bitcoin, some people starting at a very rudimentary level, but even like spending less than you earn, as an example, and actually having an incremental savings to work with. Some people are also in that, and I think that's part of the problem with the current fiat system is that debt is, in my opinion, sort of like can be predatory on people. And so people maybe even lose the appreciation for that most basic, almost like what should be intuitive idea of having incremental savings, where they can kind of feel as though, okay, because money's infinite, debt is somewhat plentiful, and can find themselves in, not able to escape, the circumstances they're in, because they're kind of predated on by a traditional financial service sector. So
Yeah.
so yeah, there's kind of layers even before you can get to even having value to store, I suppose, right?
100%. And it's so I just had Robert Kiyosaki on my show, who wrote the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And this is what we talked about on there as well. And it's just a personal story on the side. I told my mum that I had Robert Kiyosaki coming on. She'd never, she's 70. She'd never read Rich Dad Poor Dad. So the week before that I had him on, she read it and she was like, "This is so challenging," but it's challenging in a good way because it's changing her mindset towards money. And it's exactly what you said there. It's making her think about her finances more like a business and having a balance sheet and cash flow, assets and liabilities. Whereas we as individuals, a lot of people don't run their life like that. But if you're a business, you do. You run for the cash, for the balance sheet. And it's just very interesting to see the. Obviously, she wasn't clued up on all of this before, but it's interesting to see the journey now that she goes on, and she's just an example. I see this all the time with people learning about this, and this is why I'm saying that Bitcoin's irrelevant. Like in that book, it doesn't mention Bitcoin, but you need to understand all of that first, and then Bitcoin becomes so obvious.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And it's great to see. I mean, there's these people who were around prior to Bitcoin, like Robert Kiyosaki, speaking about, I guess, fundamental financial principles of personal finances, and I'm also kind of lumping gold bugs into this kind of group in my mind.
Yeah.
But for many of these people, once Bitcoin came into the picture, for many of them, it was less of a big leap to kind of bridge to understand Bitcoin's value. And so many of these people, I think, tended to be earlier adopters. Now, Robert Kiyosaki is quite a large voice in the Bitcoin space. It is surprising that some gold bugs, I'm thinking Peter Schiff is probably the most noteworthy, that have not bridged that gap, even though so many of the underlying fundamental principles about problems in the current financial system, the need to have a good store of value, but have not been able to actually go from the physical world into a digital solution. Any perspectives on like the people who just all fundamentally cannot accept, and like maybe the underlying reasons for that?
So I would say Peter Schiff, I believe he does understand it. I'm just saying that's my opinion, and I think because he does a good job of winding up the Bitcoiners, and I think he does it on purpose for publicity and engagement. I could be wrong, I don't know, but I think that he understands it. He's been around enough to understand it. But you're right, a lot of people struggle with that physical to digital shift. And we've seen many people make that, like Robert Kiyosaki, Larry Lepard is a huge voice in the community. And yeah, I think just because gold bugs demographically tends to be older generations, because I don't come across many younger folk that are diehard gold bugs. I'm yet to come across someone like that. But yeah, it tends to be older generations, and it's a lot of information to take in and understand. Like, yes, they understand the store of value aspect of gold, and they probably understand the Bitcoin store of value aspect, but it's the technology part that many struggle with, and because they tend to be in that age bracket, it's probably just I'm happy with what I've got currently, because yeah, I mean gold's doing fine. Gold's doing very well at the moment. So yeah, you will see some people that have got that curiosity and that questioning why and wanting to go further, but then others that are just like, okay, I've learned enough, I'm happy. Like Bitcoin is that ego test, right? And it's whoever wants to take the test. Some people don't want to, and they're just happy sitting where they are. And maybe the next generation down from them in their family will then start that transition from gold or real estate. Like, I think we'll see more capital moving out of real estate realistically into Bitcoin than we will from gold to Bitcoin, because real estate has such a monetary premium on top of it. So I think we will see a lot more capital moving from that rather than gold.
In the nearer term,
In the near term, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, Bitcoin will surpass both
Yeah.
in the long term.
It'll suck in all the. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no sense having your store of value in almost anything else unless you're also using it, like an old car or something, or artwork that you really appreciate and also see it as a store of value. But yeah, I certainly real estate. I think people are quite. I think it's becoming more apparent that there's a lot of, yes, the price will continue to go up, but I think there's two things that kind of I think are people are starting to wake up to. One is because people who are not in the housing market are basically no longer able to even get on the ladder now because the monetary premium is going to push the prices so high. Can this kind of go on indefinitely? Or are we going to reach a ceiling where it's politically untenable to like keep on having such high disparity in this? So I think that's one factor that will maybe put a bit of a cap on it. And I guess the other one is that people are realizing, okay, there actually are a lot of hidden additional costs in real estate. Yes, every kind of brags about 10%, 12% a year increases in my value of my home. And it also gets boosted because everybody takes on, mortgages are quite plentiful, relatively low cost interest rates on those mortgages. So you can really boost those returns. But you have insurance premiums going up very, very fast. Property taxes, there's constantly repair work and stuff. It seems like with my friends with real estate, every couple months, one of my friends has a major issue with their place. There's water damage, leaking, roof replacements, all this stuff, right? So I think from a peace of mind standpoint, Bitcoin, in my opinion, is just optimal. So I can understand that kind of, the monetary premium being sucked into real estate into Bitcoin. Gold, I guess, just has so much. I used to think it would be quite rapid because of this kind of like connection between people understanding why gold is treated as money and Bitcoin. And you'd think there'd be that kind of like, it would be a logical kind of just seen as an upgrade, going from gold to digital gold, just move the value from one to the other. But I think the more I look at what's happening geopolitically, it does feel as though the central banks are certainly using gold as money still, and that's really driving demand for it. So yeah, I don't know exactly how the world's going to unfold. I can certainly see your perspective on that. The other thing that you kind of I want to ask you a question about is this idea of like in this particular cycle, if we still can use cycles as a thing, if we still believe in the cycles, but let's say since 2022, it would appear as though most of the price appreciation is driven through the adoption and acquisition of Bitcoin through institutions, corporates, ETFs, and less so through individual adoption. So it does seem a little bit of like, this idea of people waking up to Bitcoin and individuals kind of going on this journey. It doesn't appear as though that's really the major trend that's ongoing. At the same time, people are kind of maybe indirectly getting exposure through MicroStrategy, ETFs ending up in their pension funds, these sorts of things. So, I guess my question would be, do you think there's a right or wrong form by which to kind of access Bitcoin if you have kind of like individual self-custody on one end of the spectrum, and then like, I don't want to go as far as like contracts for difference or super speculative stuff, but like, let's say Bitcoin treasury companies or ETFs on the other side of the spectrum. How do you think about these different ways to get exposure to Bitcoin, and what do you educate your listeners on?
It's different for different people, and it goes back to how we started it. It's like depends where you are on that journey, and that where you are in the rabbit hole as well. Because like the best form that you can do in my opinion is you can buy actual Bitcoin, and then move it into self custody. So you are the custodian of that, and you've got no third party interference. That's the whole point of Bitcoin. But what we are seeing is it getting weaved into the financial plumbing of how we currently run, which is to be expected. Like we can't just think that we were going to go from the world that we live in to a world straight away that everyone is going to be sovereign individuals and have custody responsibility for their wealth within the space of a couple of years. It's crazy to think that, because society have been used to their money in a bank for so long, and businesses as well, used to their money being in the bank for so long. They don't have responsibility. If they get hacked, then they will get that money back, or a certain percentage of that money back. You can call up your bank and you can say there's a support team and all of this. You can't expect people to go from that straight to, okay, I've got 12 words, however you want to set it up, multi-sig. There's so many different options. I've got this, and this is my key, my password, and this is all my Bitcoin, my wealth there. So I think we're just at that stepping stone. I look at Bitcoin as like we're in the evolution of it. And there's going to be different phases. And this part is definitely the store of value phase, where people are understanding that 21 million is also highlighting, well, that's getting highlighted because people are focusing more on the problem a little bit more. So we've got the national debts around the world, the US primarily is, I want to say about 37 trillion. Yeah. So people are highlighting that a lot more. Government spending is definitely getting highlighted a lot more. And the printing of money, all of this, which then the 21 million becomes a little bit more obvious. So we're definitely going through that phase, and institutions now coming in. And if you look at the likes of ETFs, like you need to remember the ETFs there are individuals behind that. They're just buying a product rather than buying actual Bitcoin. And they need to understand that. That's one thing. They are trusting that third party to do that. But that is still retail. A lot of that is still retail buying Bitcoin to an extent. So that needs to be understood. But then also we're in that phase of accumulate as much Bitcoin as you possibly can whilst you can.
The gold rush, gold rush, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. The race has definitely started, and I would say Michael Saylor started that. In the terms of institutions, corporations coming into it, a lot of people have looked what he's done and now trying to replicate that and do it as fast as they possibly can. But yeah, we don't. I can't say to anyone one way is better than the other. I can say like, this is what I believe and this is my recommendation. And of course, I'm always going to go towards buying spot Bitcoin and self-custodying it. So you have got responsibility, but then I also understand that I'm a lot further down the rabbit hole than a lot of people. And it might take people a couple of years to get to that stage and that conviction, because you need to get to a certain conviction in Bitcoin. And understanding of how manipulated and potentially corrupt the current money and system actually is, to then lose trust in that. And then your trust is kind of shifting more towards Bitcoin. So I see it as an evolution. We're definitely in that store of value phase. And I like to think that medium of exchange comes next. And it looks like it potentially will. I can't say how long, because I mean that's why Bitcoin was invented, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It wasn't just a store of value. It was a medium of exchange globally, which I still think we're on track for that, and we're just in this phase.
Yeah, lots of great stuff there. So maybe I'll start with what you, and I'll just kind of add a couple comments. Like I think that's probably one of the most critical debates ongoing in the community right now. Is this kind of like, is Bitcoin the end game for also payments and medium of exchange? And if so, how long to get there, and what does that pathway look like? Or will we invariably have fiat or other types of payments that are or other cryptos potentially satisfying that role? And I personally also am kind of in the same camp as you, that I think we will get there, and I think why we get there is because at some point merchants will not want to accept anything else. If like why have a middle intermediary if they want to store their wealth in Bitcoin, and the consumers also want to store their wealth in Bitcoin? Why would you ever go to something as an intermediary, right? Unless the government that you live within says you must use this, right? So I'm with you, but I think there will certainly be time to kind of get there. And I am also in this camp that it'll be primarily store value first, and then at some point in time, it will become also the universal medium of exchange. And I think there is this kind of like need to converge towards one as we become a more globalized society. The inefficiencies of having so many different currencies to have to exchange between just becomes kind of illogical. But of course, what the big dilemma with this is that governments will give up the power they have over the money supply, which is a big issue. Really cool philosophy around that, but maybe this idea you talked about evolution, kind of want to talk a little bit about that as well. This is the term we use at Orange Wheel, talking about like the monetary transition. So it's not really, as you say, like it's not like we're going from one system to the next overnight, like a flip of a switch. It is something that's going to last years, decades. And that's also what I think makes it so fascinating. And I think you brought up a few aspects of that transition. One is this kind of like individual level, people getting trust with it, building trust, building conviction, understanding, and kind of as more people in society go on that journey, that's kind of part of that transition. That takes time. It takes kind of some old people to die, new people that can get brought up in the system. I think the other one is also, it would be extremely chaotic. So if we have the kind of libertarian anarcho-capitalist utopia where it's only individuals using Bitcoin and we don't have these kind of like traditional structures, it will never actually become dominant, right? If most of the wealth in the world is still in the old system, individuals are only creating new incremental wealth at a certain pace. It will probably never become it'll never really win, in a sense, or take many generations. On the other hand, I would also say that like if all the wealth managers or stewards of capital in the world recognize almost instantaneously, and they all rush to move their wealth out of real estate, out of gold, out of everything, and into Bitcoin, that would also be just a crazy, chaotic situation where so many people would be, kind of screwed over, I suppose, in that. So I think it's actually in some ways very good that this is happening relatively slow, and with, as you said, Bitcoin getting weaved into traditional capital structures to provide, the way I sort of see it is like it's providing some concrete stability in what would otherwise be a sand crumbling paper house of cards, and that is so it's more of a hybridization than it is a strictly one to the other transfer. So I guess my question after all that rambling is like, when we think about not just individuals, but corporates, institutions who are also managing wealth, what barriers do these folks tend to have that prevent them from building conviction or beginning to integrate Bitcoin into their own companies and institutions?
Yeah, so we've, from a corporate institution standpoint, and like some of the wealth managers and stuff that we talk to, a lot of it does come down to that ego test of this is the way that I was taught. This is the way that I see the world. This is my mindset. This is how we currently make money. And to then say that there's something else, there's something new, that's only been around 16 years, is very difficult for a lot of people to get their head around. And one example is like the Bitcoin treasury companies like that are popping up around the world in different jurisdictions. Like in the UK specifically, we got a lot of traditional finance people reaching out to us and being like bewildered what was happening with these treasury companies, because you're essentially going into their playground and bringing volatility, Bitcoin volatility in there. Loads of new investors that are Bitcoiners and want to jump onto these vehicles essentially. And there's been so much traditional finance organizations, companies, people within them reaching out and just asking. I've been on so many calls, just like, this is what a treasury company is. This is what they're trying to do. Just even the basics to it, understand, so they can understand what is happening there. So it's very interesting seeing them trying to now catch up. And the treasury companies, whether you like them or not, it is forcing people to understand Bitcoin. Because we're now playing in their playground, and it's almost looping back the other way. And it's like they're seeing these prices, the volatility there. They're seeing companies accumulate Bitcoin en masse, and like that's their sole purpose, pretty much. It's just very strange for people to understand. Which then they're like, okay, well, why are people interested in this? And then it goes to, oh, it's because of Bitcoin. And they're like, oh, maybe we should look into this now. So it's almost a reverse way of learning about it. But we are seeing a lot more people learn about it because of that, which is a very interesting thing. And I didn't expect that. So, but you have to be open-minded. A lot of like the people that are questioning this are open-minded. One person that springs to mind, I've had him on my podcast. I've been on his podcast. It's a guy called Alan Smith. He's a wealth manager in London. He's an amazing guy, become a friend, and he actually came on my podcast with only a few months under his belt of understanding Bitcoin, but he was open and he was asking me questions on the podcast, and wanting to learn about it. And I think that's what you need to have, is that, okay, the world is changing. The only constant in life is change. I need to be willing to change with it. And that you need to come in with that mindset. And I feel like a lot of people in traditional finance potentially don't have that kind of mindset.
Great. That's a great answer. That's this mindset perspective. It wasn't what I was expecting. It's what I don't think many people come with that. They usually say like it's the volatility. It's something kind of technical, but it's interesting to hear it's actually more of a personal thing. And I would agree with you that certainly when I meet Bitcoiners, I think a common personality trait amongst most of the Bitcoiners I meet is this idea of like openness, curiosity, willingness to be a bit humble about things. So this kind of ego test, as you've sort of brought up, maybe it's related to that a little bit. So I think, and I'm with you, I think there's some people who just, will not have that openness. And I think there's a lot of people who just will look at Bitcoin treasury companies or Bitcoin more generally, any sort of form, without doing the work and just say it's a bubble, it's a Ponzi scheme, they can come up with all these answers that are not rooted in any reality. And I think that's a quite hubristic approach to things, right? Which is, I just think it's strange that people can be very successful in traditional finance with that kind of mindset. And yet, it's quite surprising, I think. Do you hear from folks, though, if they start saying the technical aspects, where they say, okay, I might understand Bitcoin enough, I sort of get it, quote unquote, but it's too volatile. The price moves way up and down, and I if I want to store a value that I'm comfortable with or that my investors are comfortable with, it needs to be, if people want to treat this as money, it should be more or less as stable as a money market fund. Any perspectives on how to address that concern?
I mean, volatility in Bitcoin is collapsing, which is making it easier. Those sorts of conversations, it's maturing as an asset, as money. But yeah, what the way that we can approach it is zooming out a little bit more, and looking at it from a longer period of time, and introducing the idea of dollar cost averaging, what that actually does during times of volatility. Because if you can explain what's happening with the dollar cost averaging, it doesn't really matter when you're making that purchase, if it's up or down, as long as you're constantly doing it, the volatility can play in your favor. So that's the kind of conversations that we have around that. But you're right, it's because we talk to businesses, predominantly private businesses. I realize I talked about public companies there, but we don't really have much involvement with any of them. We focus on the private companies, and it's more educating the individuals in the business around Bitcoin, because we get a lot of people coming to us from organizations that lots of different sizes, from like one-man bands, one-woman bands, up until like top-tier sports teams.
Wow.
But a lot of the time, it will be, I work in this organization, I'm maybe one of the execs there, and I understand Bitcoin, but the rest of the board don't understand Bitcoin, or the shareholders, however it's structured. And it requires a third party to come in. And I think this is very similar to what you guys do, is going in and educating around Bitcoin as a whole, so the individuals get it first, because then it will make sense why you would then incorporate it into your business. And I'm going off a bit on a tangent here, but the sort of things that we'll look at is, like, I use McDonald's as an example quite a lot, because like famously their founder said, we're not in the hamburger business, we're in the real estate business. But on the high street, everyone walks past McDonald's and thinks, okay, well, that's how they're making all their money, is selling hamburgers and fries. But no, they've really cleverly designed their business to last centuries. Like, I think they've been around for nearly 100 years now. It was in the 1930s, I think it was established. But yeah, if you look on their balance sheet, they've got upwards of $45 billion worth of real estate on there.
Wow.
And they've been accumulating an asset. So they've essentially, the way that I picture it in my head, and in the presentations that we give, is they've got the castle, which is their burgers and fries, but they've built a financial moat around their operating business, which is real estate, so that they can weather any storm, because they've got so much assets on their balance sheet. And that's exactly what Strategy did. But they've just done it in a digital format. And that's exactly what all these other companies are doing, public companies, but also private companies. And yeah, I believe, we as a business believe that every business needs a Bitcoin strategy like this. And it's just nice to use a well-known brand like that, that have done it with real estate, which Bitcoin wasn't around 100 years ago, so they couldn't have done that. But it's the same idea. So yeah, I realize I've gone off very much on a tangent.
I think you certainly answered the question, right? In the sense that I think the original question was talking about like the kind of technical aspects of Bitcoin that might dissuade companies from thinking about it. And I think the solution that made sense for me is like, really, it's about a bit of holistic education with the individuals in the executive team or board to kind of counter all of these ideas. And I guess fundamentally it comes down, as you said, with this castle analogy and moat analogy, like long-term thinking, right? So keeping the capital in the business, storing it in something like historically real estate, like McDonald's did, but more in today's day and age, Bitcoin's available. So why not use Bitcoin? I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's another area that I find when we speak to some of our clients that they say, because I think traditional corporate finance, a lot of the times, I think does a disservice to a lot of businesses, because the textbook stuff is always saying, well, if you have excess capital that you've and retained earnings that you're not investing back in the business, you should pay it back to shareholders, right? That's kind of the thing. But I think that's why we see a lot of companies becoming weak zombies and also ultimately dying in some cases, because they're not set up for something to weather certain storms, as you said. They kind of give back all their capital to the shareholders, and then when something tough comes along, there's a recession or some sort of down lull in the business cycle, they cannot stand it, and then they have to either take on debt just to survive, and then they can kind of enter debt slavery, or they go under, right? So I think that's another area that we also need to kind of almost change the academic aspects of corporate finance. I'm kind of convinced that the textbooks of economics, corporate finance, investor relations, all this stuff is sort of going to change as we go through this transition towards Bitcoin, because it really kind of upends the traditional thinking.
Yeah, 100%. And you're not building your business on sand. It's like now you can actually build your business on a solid foundation, and accumulate that asset, money, however you want to reference Bitcoin, and keep accumulating that on your balance sheet. And we're seeing in the more public side of things, we're seeing shareholders happy to be diluted to then buy more Bitcoin, and like celebrating all of this. And it's a totally different way of thinking. And you're right. And I think it's just it's very different to the way that traditional finance people that have been working in it for decades have thought about this. Mm-hmm. So as I said, a mindset shift is the big thing. And I think with everything, a lot of it is that mindset. I don't mean to come. I don't know why I'm riffing on this mindset side of things, but one of the influential books for me with Bitcoin in general was The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth. And because that was a mindset shift for me, and it was thinking about, okay, we're living in an inflationary world. What happens when we live in a deflationary world? What happens to the price of everything? And we're kind of seeing that in capital markets as well happening. Not the same shift, but at that sort of level of, wow, okay, this is totally different to what we were doing before. So it comes back to that ego test of, am I willing to actually put in the work to understand this? But we are seeing a lot of people now waking up to making that mindset shift, or taking the decision to make that mindset shift and start to learn about it. And we are getting inundated with private businesses that want to understand Bitcoin. But then you can also see in public markets as well that there's a lot more interest coming into these Bitcoin companies.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, I think the rise of the Bitcoin treasury companies and all the media attention they've been getting is making all businesses, whether private, public, small, big, pay attention at least, and at least form an opinion. And at least those that have an opinion, many of them hopefully are also understanding, doing some education and research to understand why are there so many investors that are willing, as you said, they get diluted in fiat terms to ultimately get more Bitcoin per share, right? So really seeing Bitcoin as the end game, as the unit of account, it's a huge upside down world shift. But I think you're right. It's actually really good advertising, I think, for all business leaders, the phenomenon of Bitcoin treasury companies, and Strategy and Metaplanet being the most prominent of them. You mentioned, the UK, that there's a number of them. I think Smarter Web Company is the most prolific, I guess, at doing this strategy in the UK, although there's a number of other ones that I'm aware of. If we look at the UK, from a regulatory standpoint, so I think what sort of has unleashed the phenomenon of Bitcoin treasury companies now replicating the MicroStrategy playbook, even though he's been doing it since 2020, arguably, although that was just his own cash on the balance sheet in the first instance. It's only been the last 9 months that companies have really started doing this, maybe 12 months if you count Semler and Metaplanet. But My hunch is it's been the regulatory shift in the US that has sparked acceptance to actually kind of embrace Bitcoin at a corporate level and replicate the MicroStrategy playbook. So if you look at the UK, do you have any perspectives on the regulatory and tax setup there and the extent to which it like dissuades companies from Bitcoin or promotes it? And do you have a view on like where this might be going? Is there any sort of like lobbying going on or people in parliament that you think might be actually getting some traction? And maybe to what extent does this play in with some of the financial crises, I guess, that's going on, fiscal crises in the parliament
Yeah,
today?
there's a lot and I think it was a huge statement what happened in the US of Trump being voted in, and then the executive order for strategic Bitcoin reserve, and then changing the regulations. So that's definitely opened up, and the UK usually follows the US, but just lagging behind. So it's like I always say, I'm looking into the future when I'm looking over to the US. So it will come in time, and we're seeing it slowly shift. But there's still a lot of caution from businesses and individuals. But businesses would say that there's still a worry that the debanking is still a huge worry for people, and other businesses that they interact with not liking Bitcoin, for example, are where we've got our registered company address. They said that they're not going to service us anymore.
And this is a bank or something or a financial service provider.
Yeah, so yeah, this is where you can virtually register a company in London, and they said they wouldn't service us because we deal with Bitcoin. And then we've been debanked as well. So there's still a lot of aggression towards that. So there's a worry for people, but there is solutions in place, having like e-money accounts. So it's not obvious when you're sending money to an exchange, but it's just you shouldn't have to do that. That's the thing. So yeah, we're definitely going the right direction. We're just a lot slower. We're not innovative, or we're not as innovative as the US, and I'd say the UK is just on a governmental level, just a sheep, and it will follow the herd. But the people within it, that's not the same. There is like a lot of people that are saying, okay, well, we need to start thinking about X, Y, and Z, and looking at putting Bitcoin on our balance sheet, actually taking care of ourselves, because we can't rely on the government or whoever, the regulator. So yeah, I'm very optimistic that we are going the right way, but there's still going to be a couple of years of hardship, I think.
Yeah, and I followed a little bit of Freddie New and Susie Quinn. I can't remember her last name right now.
Violet Ward.
Violet Ward, that's right. I saw them. I was at Cheat Code in Bedford last spring, and that was a very nice conference. And, I was pretty impressed with what they're doing in Bitcoin UK lobby. I can't remember the name of it exactly. What I hope does not happen is that I think the UK is holding the third most of any government in terms of Bitcoin that I guess they seized through confiscations. Given they're going through some fiscal crises right now, and you have a fairly left-leaning government in power, I would hope they don't sell the Bitcoin to try to generate revenue. That would be
worry.
Yeah, and I think you look back at what Germany did, or Saxony and other countries before them doing the same thing, and they look like fools in retrospect when they they sell. So, so I think the one other kind of thing on the regulations thing, like to what extent and I totally agree with you in the sense that certainly Europe here, continental Europe, is also much more cautious and conservative, less risk taking that you get in kind of the US style. And I guess the UK is much more like that as well. It's kind of slower moving conservatism, which is not always a bad thing per se, right? But I think in this case, it can certainly reduce the rate of adoption of Bitcoin. But when you hear about other things like ESG, is the emissions associated with Bitcoin mining, to what extent is this still a detractor with some of the stakeholders that you work with?
No, nowhere near as much anymore. I would say that was a big thing in 2022, 2023. I think a lot of that is starting to get debunked and like more publicly debunked anyway. We're not seeing anywhere near the levels as 3 years ago for this. Yeah, the environmental side of things, it might come back around, the narrative. But yeah, it's not a massive thing, and especially when you've got AI now, and like the AI uses a large amount of energy as well. People can see the advantage of that. So then it's just showing people the advantage and the value of Bitcoin as well. So now you've got AI, it really helps because it's power sucking as well. And like energy, using more energy is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just where you're getting that from. So yeah, if you can explain that in a well way and in a good way and communicate it well, then yeah, for many people, it's not a huge problem anymore, which is nice.
That's that we've gone a little bit over time, so I apologize for eating into your additional time here. Before we wrap up, is there any like one last note you would make to kind of business leaders? What's kind of the one step you would advise they take tomorrow to start preparing for the transition towards Bitcoin?
I would say start learning. Like every business will be a Bitcoin business, so you can either jump on this train now and start learning about it, or you can wait until into a couple of years' time, whenever that time is that you decide to now is the right time. But I would say now is the time to start learning about it, because if you look back in history, like people were asking, do we really need a website? When the internet first came around. Look at everyone now. That will be the same in 10, 20 years' time. Every business will have a Bitcoin strategy. They will have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So yeah, you can either learn about it now, or you can learn about it later, but you just won't reap the benefits quite as much and have that competitive advantage. Because we're running an event in November. It's called Bitcoin: A Competitive Advantage for businesses to understand this, because now is the right time. Like, not in the future. Now is the right time to be learning about this. I'm not saying go out and buy it. I'm saying learn.
100% agree with this. I think the competitive advantage is being a first mover in this space, given the nature of Bitcoin's price movements. So I think that's fantastic advice. Jordan Walker, fantastic to have you on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time. Apologies for going over, but all the best. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.